bit about how the story came about, why you decided to do this film. I suppose the story of Manto is a story that many South Asians are familiar with, but why now?
Right. I think there are more people who are not familiar with, despite the fact that those who are, they are really familiar with Manto, but I've kept in mind that there will be many who won't. I first read Manto in college, but I kind of rediscovered him in 2012, which was his centenary celebration, and many people wrote about him. And I also began to read his essays, and it was just fascinating. It was just fascinating to see the writer, the person behind those stories. And I realized he was grappling with some of the same issues that we are grappling today with. And somehow there was a personal resonance with his struggle for freedom of expression, his own understanding of the universal human experience, which is beyond these binary identities that is dividing us, whether in the name of nationality, religion, caste, gender, sexual preference, color of the skin, what have you. The world is plagued by those identities. So I felt that the best way to respond, probably for me, to what's happening today, and to sort of, not just as a cathartic thing, but also to sort of actively respond to what's going on, would be to take refuge in the story of Manto. So you can go back in time and yet realize that 70 years later we're still grappling with those same things. And in some ways, I think it's very inspirational to see Manto's stories and his free-spiritedness, his desire to tell things as they are, to show reality, to show them as a mirror to the society, his courage to follow those convictions. I think these are things that we all want to have, and that's why in Hindi Urdu there's a love called Mantoyat. There is no real word in the dictionary, which basically means the Manto-ness, and the idea was to spread that Manto-ness.
Do you think there's also a message that it's a reflection of South Asia today in terms of there's clearly a political statement in the film? So what's your...
But both my films, if you see Firak, which was 10 years ago, and now, while they have come maybe from a socio-political angst as well, but they're also very personal stories. It's a story of an artist, and his own angst, his own personal journey. He was no activist, but he just wanted to show reality as it is, and he realized everything that was stopping him, which was not just the authorities, but even friends and peers who kind of betrayed him, or he felt isolated. And I think today liberal voices are feeling a bit isolated, and I think we need that reaffirmation, or we need each other to remind ourselves that there are greater things to strive for than these kind of petty politics that's sort of dragging us down.
In terms of period dramas, they usually cost a lot of money, and this presumably was not a high-budget film. But could you just tell us a bit about how you chose locations for both Lahore and Mumbai, and how you made that work?
Yeah, the budget was not very big, but yet it wasn't a small indie film, because I had to recreate Bombay and Lahore, and they were almost like doing two films. You can't repeat the cast or the locations, the costume, nothing. So it was very challenging. Even before I had a producer on board, I had sort of recce'd and seen a lot of locations. I had found places that would replicate. I wanted to shoot in Lahore, but unfortunately at that time the Indo-Pak relationships, as always, 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards, couldn't shoot there. And we found, it's ironical, but found it in Gujarat, Lahore. So the film Firak, which was set in Gujarat, was shot in Hyderabad, so that we don't die before the film. But this one was, we found it in Gujarat, and actually the people were very, very supportive in that village, and we could sort of create a Lahore. But many people have also helped me in this film, both in terms of cast, crew, even in developing the script. I didn't grow up in an Urdu-speaking family, and having to explore the language, and through the language, the nuances of it. So many people have helped me also with the writing and the research. So it's also a lot of goodwill has come into play in this film.
The film, both Firak and this film, both cover very violent times, and what's interesting about whether it's a female eye or something that we've discussed is, as a director, your choices about films aren't violent, but there's a subtext of violence behind them. So I wondered about your choices about violence and about reflecting the times historically.
As a viewer, I've never liked seeing violence. Though that's just that genre, even though it's sort of very happening genre. It's somehow never grabbed me. I feel like it's sort of violence is almost glamorized. It's almost so good, it's so well made that to think of violence as something that can be so watchable and beautiful is a bit scary for me. And it is therefore ironical that both my films are actually set in violent times, but you don't really see any violence. Because for me, the impact on emotions, relationships, human psychology of violence is far more important and I think interesting as well than just seeing violence for what it is. And now with news and internet, we see so much violence and we've kind of almost numbed ourselves of it. So yeah, in both the films. And about female gaze, I don't know, in the sense that when I used to be asked even after Firak, what does it feel to be a woman director? And I would say, well, I have no idea what it feels to be a male director. So when you direct, you're just a director. But having now been engaged with this whole issue of having more women in films, and which is in every sector, but because coming from sort of on the fringes of the industry, this is something we often talk, that there aren't enough diverse voices, there isn't enough of the female gaze, and for that I think first I have to own that identity of saying, yes, I'm a woman director and I think there should be a lot more women directors. So now I kind of own it up for whatever it's worth. But I'm sure it influences some of my choices, though they are not conscious, just as my other identities influence those.
So you've got a great performance from Nawazuddin. And could you just tell us a bit about did you think about him from the start, or is it something that
yes.
you kind of developed with the character?
No, I did actually. I did think of him right from the beginning when I started working on the script. When I was researching, I was just bogged down by the amount of research I had to do because Manto died at 42, so much of the research was dependent on the written word. But he was so prolific that he had written about so many different things that in some ways it was easy and difficult because there was so much material. The family also helped me a lot. I went to Lahore a few times and kept in touch with them. I used to call them for the smallest of things, and they've been really such a big support, and they've given me sort of unconditional love. And I think that's why it's also very close to his life. I know in biographies you can take departures, and people do, and maybe fictionalize it, but I'm not really a trained filmmaker, and I don't know the grammar of films enough. I don't even watch films that much. So for me it was more like I'm part of that family and I just owe it to them. And when they watch the films, especially the daughters who were very young when Manto died, they were literally 5, 7 and 9. So their memory was a bit sort of hazy. But Manto's sister-in-law, Safia's sister, Zakia Khala, who I call her, and she helped me a lot to sort of remember things, not just about Manto, because there was very little written about Safia, because there's still lots about Manto, but how do you build that character of Safia? And how do you build that relationship and those little nuances? How was he as a father? What was his relationship with his children? And those kind of nuances, the family really helped me to put together. In fact, there are 2 people from the family. Do you want to just raise your hands? Yeah, there they are. Yes, and they are from Safia's brother's daughters, is that right? Yeah. So thank you very much for being here. And it's oh, you too? Okay. It's always nice. I feel like it's part of the family, and I'm really grateful to the affection and the support they've given me. So Nawaz was someone who I thought of right from the beginning. He was also in Firak, and I had sort of seen his growth as an actor. Although I have to say, because I don't like violent films, and he's done plenty of those, I haven't watched those. But his eyes were one of the main reasons why I decided to take him, because he himself has struggled a lot in his life, and having been an actor myself, casting is very important. It's not just the skill and the craft of that, but what you bring as a person. And I've done a lot of research, so he sort of took all of that and brought in his own talent and his honesty and his, he just melts into characters, as you saw. So, and also Rasika, the one who played Safia, and she's wonderful in the film, and she was also someone that I had thought of from the beginning when I'd seen her work. So.
Can you tell us about your choices of intercutting these Manto stories with the historic character? Because I think that's a very interesting part of the film, which is...
It's one of those things, like you say, magically, that's the first thought I had about the film. When I started thinking about the film, I just felt like, this is how I want to begin. And strangely, the first and the last story were things that I had it literally from day one. In Manto's works as well, the line between fact and fiction are very blurred. You almost don't know whether this character was there or whether did he make it up. And I wanted to therefore keep that seamless quality of, sort of blending in the stories with his main narrative. And I also felt that it's important to understand the man behind his works, to be able to see a glimpse of his writings. Because if I tell you he was this great writer, he was very sensitive, the partition impacted him greatly, and it came out with very personal stories, it's not a lecture, and how do you know that? It's very difficult to get into the head of a writer, and I felt the best way would be to give you those glimpses so that you see how he processed that violence and why it pained him at a very, very personal level. And in fact, partition was the only time that he couldn't write. Somebody was so prolific and wrote so much, he wrote close to 300 short stories, hundreds of essays, hundreds of radio plays, etc. And it was that period because he was so deeply impacted. So that's something I always wanted, and I often say that if there was a film about a musician, wouldn't you want to hear the music of the musician? So similarly, I just felt like I had to show you some of the stories.
So we're going to open it to the audience now. There's a gentleman just in the middle here. So we've got mics coming down.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Can I just say, first of all, Nandita, I have always admired your work.
Thank you.
I saw Fire in 1998 here in London.
96.
And I wrote a review of it, and so did the same with Virar. So anyway, coming to this film, talking about your research and your interactions with the family, what I'm curious about is how true to life you have portrayed it, because in the film he appears to be not a very likable guy. As both as a writer.
There are already people disagreeing with you.
And so, how true to life was he? He comes across as arrogant and self-centered.
Well, I think all of us have contradictions. If somebody had to ask me, if I had to honestly speak about myself, and if I only said the good things, I don't think you would believe it, and it wouldn't be the truth either. So I right from the beginning in fact, Manto would have wanted to show all his warts and blemishes, and that's what sets him apart from a lot of other writers. He never tried to beautify things. There's a whole something called Manto Prayer. You should go online and read it, and it's a very interesting one where he talks about how everyone goes towards the light and he prefers the dark labyrinths, and it's all about wanting to, when you see reality as is, then you are going to see it with all its beauty and all its ugliness. So I think it was important for me to make him fallible, to make him real as he was. So yes, he was arrogant, yes, he was egoistic, he was also deeply sensitive. He had so much moral courage, but also was scared to go to jail. He loved his family, but also was compelled to speak the truth. And I think that's what makes him so special. So I think those of us who are a little more comfortable with ambiguities and contradictions, I think wouldn't mind. But film viewing is always subjective, and each one of us takes different things from it.
There's a gentleman on the side there.
Hello, Nandita. Hi.
Oh yeah.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Can I congratulate you on making a wonderful movie,
Thank
a
you
thoroughly
so much.
enjoyable movie, first of all.
Thank you.
And what really appealed to me was the bringing out of the human side of Manto, what you just described. And I respectfully disagree with that gentleman, because that's what makes Manto what he is. I also love the periodicity of how you managed to capture the 1940s Hindustan or India, and that was very effective. Just wanted to ask you, in terms of putting in some of the Bollywood star cast, was that a conscious decision, like Rishi
Yes.
Kapoor, etc., etc.? And also, please, just before I finish, is there a trilogy in this?
I knew that this film, it was not easy, first of all, to raise funds for this film. And right from the beginning, I was being told, oh, it's going to be a niche film, it's going to be an art house film. We label films so quickly, and there's so much of sort of preconceived bias almost towards films like this. And Manto was very accessible in his times. It wasn't that only the Urdu, sort of literati was reading him. People were, literally the person on the street was waiting for his column. And I just felt I want to make Manto accessible. And I know the challenges of marketing and distributing. As an actor, I've suffered it, and I see various other independent films suffering at the box office because of just no level playing field. And therefore, I thought it would be good, especially for the Indian diaspora and for the South Asian diaspora, if we could get some known actors who are, of course, good at their work. So if there are people who don't know them, and that's fine. And those of you who know, and there's a little bit of a surprise, and and especially in the marketing phase. And I went to them saying, I haven't thought of you while writing it. This is a part that's not written for you. I just want you to support this film because I just want this story to go to the widest audience possible. And that was really the reason. In terms of the trilogy, in all honesty, I realized the similarity of, I think, the thought and the intent behind Firak and Manto only after I'd done Manto. When I was doing Manto, I didn't even realize there was some connection with Firak. But your basic concerns about life and people and the human suffering and what you see around yourself doesn't change in 10 years because the reality hasn't changed. Probably the relevance of Manto has only grown since the time I began working on it. So yes, there is a certain pattern, and I don't know what the third film will be, if there will be or not, but hopefully I won't wait another 10 years to make my third film.
So we just time for a few more last quick. I just want to get a lady in because we haven't had a woman ask questions.
Absolutely.
Hello, Nandita. Number one, I'm very thankful to BFI for getting you here in front of us, because I went to Lady Shriram College, and you've been a poster child of everything cool for all of us girls to aspire to. So very, very popular, and we've been following your work since Fire. Absolutely brilliant film, very soulful. I had tears by the end of it.
So I saw them.
Yeah, they were very, it was very moving, at the end especially. How much of you did you put into the movie?
It's interesting. This morning I got a message from someone who'd seen it last night and said, I don't know where you end and where Manto begins. And it's not a conscious thing, but for me, even with Firak, when I said this is a very personal film, or if I tell someone Manto is a very personal film, they don't understand. But I feel the intention reaches, like you have, and various people have begun to ask me, and I've actually begun to think about it, because it's not a conscious thing. But the fact I chose this story, I don't know whether one can even call it chose, because if I'd chosen this script, I probably wouldn't have done this film. It was way too difficult. So it's not a choice. I felt just compelled to tell, and there is a lot of me in it. Because I think, at some level that it resonated with me, his own struggles, his concerns, and the dilemma of an artist. Someone yesterday said, are you as pessimistic as Manto, and or are you optimistic? And I don't know, because at some level I don't believe that we're all shining and everything is going great, because it's not. For many people, things are not going well at all. We're very privileged in many ways, and we need to acknowledge that all the time. But also I'm hopeful at some level, otherwise why do a film? I think Manto too, till the very end, believed in the redemptive power of his writing, and that's why continued writing despite all the problems that he had. So at some level I think, you make films not because it's going to create, like I said, any revolutions, but in some small way, if we can have those conversations, if we can reflect about those things, that's what you hope. So in some ways, one is also hopeful. So I think there is a lot of me in the film as well.
Thank you. The gentleman here, then we'll have to...
And there's one who's very
I'll watch it.
Hi, forgive me for being redundant, but congratulations on the fantastic biopic in the true sense of the word. Me and my colleagues, we all are from Pakistan, and this is perhaps the only time, or one of the few times that India and Pakistan have really come together. And
Manto will bring us together.
Yeah. And I know for a fact that you haven't seen the Manto made in Pakistan. So was that a conscious decision so as to differentiate yourself, or it doesn't feel like watching it?
So just for those of you who don't know, there was a film in Pakistan made on Manto in 2015, which was sort of after I'd already begun researching and a couple of drafts were made. And I consciously didn't want to watch it. One, because it was a different treatment, it was a different time period also. The film made by Sarmad Khusat, a filmmaker from Pakistan who also acted as Manto, was from 52 to 55 when Manto died, whereas my film is from 46 to 50. But Sarmad and I did many sessions together on Manto. We did one in Lahore, we did one in Delhi, and I just think more the merrier. I've always, there have been other films that have been made on his stories as well, something called Mantostan, somebody's done a film on Toba Tek Singh, and I think there is enough in Manto's life and his works and as a reminder, so it's all good.
I'm afraid we've got time for one last question, and I think Projector's been putting his hand up there. So.
Thank you. Your film showed really well how Manto's work aroused strong passions in his lifetime. And I wondered if you could just give us a sense of whether he is now in India regarded as a literary figure, and how that contrasts to how he perhaps is regarded in Pakistan. I mean, is he in both countries now genuinely revered as a literary figure, or does his work still arouse strong reactions? And finally, are there plans to distribute your film in Pakistan?
From what I hear, in India he has been regarded as a, sort of definitely a very important short story writer, no question about it. In fact, often in India we would say that he's one of the greatest Indian short story writers, and in Pakistan they say he's one of the greatest Pakistani short story writers. And I think it's a great disservice to Manto to divide him on the basis of nationality. He belongs to both. I think in Pakistan, from what I hear, he was embraced really as recently as 2012. Many of my Pakistani friends used to say that we used to hide Manto's books and read them, and it wasn't, you're not supposed to read. And Manto himself had predicted that he told, I believe, to Safia that, many years later, once I'm dead, this country is going to celebrate me. And they did give him one of the highest civilian award, Nishan-e-Imtiaz, in 2012 at his centenary celebration. So I think there was a bit of struggle, but now people do know about Manto, not everyone. And my little contribution to this film is that the book sales of Manto has gone up. So the publishers tell us. And a lot more people are sort of curious. I know personally that a lot of people also on social media write, oh, we saw the film, or we heard about it, and we have started, we Google him, and we have read stories online. So many people are also putting those stories online. So I think it's great. It's going to come on a digital platform reasonably soon. It's these days to show independent films in theatres and distribute them, especially foreign language films around the world, has become more and more difficult. The one territory that I really wanted it to have a theatrical release was Pakistan. And I personally worked hard, and as they say, inshallah, it's going to be there very soon.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for.
Thank you.